There is a moment in the Final Empire where Vin asks Sazed about the religions he carries. They're on the road, between one danger and the next, and Sazed opens a copper mine and starts talking. Not performing, not evangelizing, just talking in that careful, unhurried way of his about what people believed before the Lord Ruler rewrote the world. And I remember reading that scene and thinking, this man is interesting. A scholar in a revolution, gentle and precise in a story full of sharp things. I had no idea what he was. I had no idea that the man on the road with his coppermine bracelets and his quiet manner and his 562 archived religions was not a supporting character in Vin's story. I had no idea that Sazed was, structurally and thematically, the entire point of the trilogy, that Kelsier was the spark, and Vin was the weapon, and Sazed was the answer. That the prophecy everyone spent 3 books arguing about was written, from the very beginning, in the shape of a talisman keeper, who nobody in the narrative was paying close enough attention to. Most readers miss this, not because it's hidden, exactly, because Sanderson built Sazed to be easy to overlook, and that's not an accident, it's the whole argument. Today we're going to look at Sazed, really look at him, not the surface reading, not the gentle steward who teaches Vin to dance and carries old books in his arms, but the full architectural picture. The character that Sanderson designed to carry the entire weight of what the trilogy is actually about. By the time we're done, you will never be able to read his first scene the same way again. Full Hero of Ages spoilers throughout. Everything in Era 1 is on the table. If you haven't finished the trilogy, go finish it, then come back. The surface reading of Sazed is comfortable and, in its own way, accurate. He's the crew's scholar, the keeper, a member of a secret terrorist tradition that has spent generations memorizing and preserving the knowledge the Lord Ruler suppressed. He carries 562 religions in his copper mines, which are the ferrochemical equivalent of an external hard drive stored in the metal cuffs he wears on his arms. He's humble, methodical, and careful. He teaches Vin to move in noble society. He provides historical context when the crew needs it. He figures out the Lord Ruler's secret, the fact that Rashek was both a ferrochemist and an allomancer simultaneously, which is the key to understanding how a human being could live for 1,000 years. In a crew of fighters and schemers, Sazed is the one who thinks. This is not wrong. Sazed is all of those things, but the surface reading treats him as a supporting function, as the crew's librarian. And that framing is the thing I want to break open today. Because a librarian is defined by what they carry for others. Sazed is defined by what he is building toward, and those are very different things. Here's the detail that breaks the surface reading. It's not a dramatic detail, it's almost painfully simple. Sazed is the only person in Kelsier's crew who joined the revolution because he believed it was right, not because he had a personal stake in the outcome. Think about everyone else. Kelsier is powered by grief and rage and a need to burn the system that took everything from him. Ham and Breeze and Doxson and Clubs are career criminals who believe in Kelsier and want to be part of something larger than the usual jobs. Vin is a survivor who attaches herself to the crew because it's the first place she's ever felt safe. These are not cynical motivations. They're human ones. They're good ones, even. But they're all personal. Sazed left the Keepers. His order, the Synod, believed in staying hidden, preserving knowledge without acting on it, waiting in patient silence for the Lord Ruler to fall by some means other than their own hands. Sazed defied them. He found Kelsier's crew and offered himself as an asset, not because of personal loss, not because he had a grudge, but because he had spent his life filling his copper mines with the records of what human beings had believed and hoped and built before the Lord Ruler erased it. And he had come to a conclusion. If you are holding the memory of a better world, and a better world is possible, staying hidden is not neutrality, it is complicity. This is the thing I find most quietly extraordinary about Sazed in Book 1. He is the only idealist in the room, and he carries his idealism in the form of dead religions, which means he carries it as loss, as things already destroyed, as proof of how completely the world can be unmade. His hope is not naive. It is built on a full accounting of what happens when hope fails. Now we get to the architecture. Because Sanderson doesn't just give Sazed a compelling character foundation and leave it there. He builds it into the structure of the whole trilogy, and the blueprint is visible from the first book if you know what to look at. Ferrochemy is the key. Where allomancy is about drawing power from metals, burning them for immediate effect, ferrochimy is about storage and retrieval. You put something in, you get it back later, but you can only retrieve what you stored. If you store strength for a week, while walking around weaker than normal, you get that strength back in a concentrated burst. Nothing is created from nothing. Nothing is lost. Everything is conserved. The philosophical resonance of ferrochimy with preservation, with the shard that built this world's magic, is not an accident. Sazed's magic is the magic of holding, of keeping, of refusing to let things be lost. And his specific application of that magic is not combat, not speed, not strength, though he uses all of those when pushed. His core application is copper mines, memory storage. He carries the records of 562 religions in his arms. He carries the histories of a civilization that the Lord Ruler spent 1,000 years trying to erase. He is literally and physically a walking archive of everything Ruin would prefer to see forgotten. Here is where it starts to become something more than a character trait. Preservation, the shard, is dying from the moment the trilogy begins. Diminished, barely coherent, reduced to a presence in the mists that can nudge and whisper and influence but cannot act decisively. Preservation's problem at the cosmic level is that Ruin is better at changing things. Ruin can alter, Ruin can corrupt, Ruin can rewrite prophecies, manipulate minds through hemalurgic spikes, and turn 1,000 years of accumulated human belief into instruments of his escape. Preservation can only hold, and holding against something that is defined by destruction is not a strategy that wins. It's a strategy that delays. What preservation needed was not another weapon. Vin was the weapon, and weapons can be countered. What preservation needed was someone who could pick up both powers, hold them simultaneously without being destroyed by the contradiction between them, and use the knowledge stored in the architecture of 1,000 years to rebuild something worth preserving. That is not a warrior's job. That is a keeper's job. That is Sazed's job. And preservation, in whatever fragmented form of intention he could still manage, had been pointing toward Sazed from the beginning. The prophecies confirm this, but not in the way everyone expected. The Hero of Ages prophecy is, as the trilogy reveals, largely falsified by Ruin. He altered the prophecies to make the hero seem like a warrior, a single dramatic figure who would take the power at the well and use it to defeat him. He altered the pronouns, the context, the framing. He turned a complex terrace text about a person who would unite and preserve and hold into a call to arms, because he needed someone to walk into the well and release him. But the original prophecy, underneath Ruin's alterations, kept certain phrases he couldn't change without breaking the text entirely. The hero will bear the future of the world on his arms, not metaphorically, on his arms. Sazed wears his copper mines as bracelets and cuffs on his arms. The future of the world, the knowledge of what the world had been before the Lord Ruler broke it, the information needed to rebuild a biosphere, a civilization, a reason for people to keep going, was physically on Sazed's arms for the entire trilogy. The prophecy was always describing him. Ruin just made everyone look at Vin instead. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first read Hero of Ages and understood what Sanderson had done with Sazed, I didn't immediately feel the satisfaction of a good plot twist. I felt something more unsettling than that. I felt like I had been reading carelessly. Because the clues are everywhere. They are not hidden. They are in every scene where Sazed talks about his copper mines and what they contain. They are in the fact that ferrochimy is defined by conservation, by refusing to lose what matters. They are in the fact that Sazed is the one character in the trilogy who thinks explicitly and at length about what makes something worth believing in, about what distinguishes faith from manipulation, about what you owe to the people who come after you. They are in the fact that when the crisis of the entire trilogy is finally resolved, it is not resolved by a fight. It is resolved by someone who understood the shape of the world well enough to rebuild it from memory. All of that was there, in every book, on every page where Sazed appeared, and I read it as backstory for a supporting character. That is Sanderson doing something very specific and very deliberate with the reader's attention. He designed Sazed to be easy to undervalue, because Sazed is easy to undervalue within the story itself. The characters around him undervalue him. Kelsier values him as an asset. The Synod treats him as a liability for choosing action over preservation. Tindwyl, the keeper he loves, spends most of their relationship pushing back against his choices. Even Sazed undervalues himself. spending the entire third book in a crisis of faith so deep that he strips off his metal mines and stops being a keeper entirely for a stretch of chapters, convinced that the thing he spent his life building has turned out to be a lie. That crisis is the most important arc in the trilogy, and it is almost universally treated as a secondary plotline by first-time readers, something happening in the background while Vin and Ellen deal with the real problems. I want to spend time on it because it is where Sanderson's argument lives. The crisis is this. Sazed discovers in Hero of Ages that the Hero of Ages prophecies are falsified, that the entire theological tradition the Keepers spent generations preserving and studying, the tradition that gave meaning to their sacrifice and structure to their hope, was manipulated by Ruin from the beginning. The thing he built his life around was, at least in part, a lie designed to serve the purposes of the god of entropy. He responds to this by losing his faith, not abstractly, systematically. He goes through every one of his 562 archived religions, reads the case for each one, and finds them wanting. Not because they are stupid or wrong or badly argued, but because they do not satisfy the specific need that his specific grief has created. He is looking for a religion that makes sense of a world where a man as good as Kelsier died, where a woman as faithful as Tyndall died, where the truth is hidden inside a lie, and the lie was designed by a god. He reads every religion in his copper mines and finds that none of them answer the question he is actually asking. Here is what I find breathtaking about this arc on reflection. Sazed is not losing his faith because he found evidence against it. He is losing his faith because he found that faith can be weaponized. Ruin took the deepest spiritual tradition of the Terrace people and turned it into a trap. And Sazed, who built his entire identity around being a keeper of belief, has to reckon with the possibility that carrying belief is not enough, that you can spend your whole life preserving what matters and still be used in the end to unmake it. This is not a young man's crisis. This is not doubt that comes from inexperience. This is the specific crisis of a person who did everything right, for the right reasons, and still found themselves holding a lie. It is one of the most honest depictions of faith collapse I have read in fantasy, and it happens in the third book of a series that most readers remember primarily for Vin doing incredible things with coins. And then Sazed finds his way through, not by finding a religion that answers his question, by realizing that he was asking the wrong question. He wasn't looking for something to believe in. He was looking for something to build. The ancient Terrace religion, the one that predates all the others, the one the Keepers had lost, and the Lord Ruler had tried to erase completely, was not a religion about comfort or meaning, or the structure of the afterlife. It was a religion about preservation itself, about the god Ter, whose name in the Terrace language means to preserve, about two forces, one of creation and one of entropy, and the human responsibility to understand both well enough to hold the balance. Sazed had been carrying the answer to his own crisis in his copper mines for the entire trilogy. It was the religion he kept putting off, the one too close to his own identity to examine without bias. The last one he read. The one that was always going to be the last one he read, because the thing you need most is usually the thing you can see least clearly. Here is the structural consequence of everything I've described. The trilogy has three main characters. Kelsier is the inciting force. He is the belief that a better world is possible, expressed as action, as violence, as love, as the willingness to become a symbol rather than a person. He breaks the system open. He makes the revolution real, and then he dies, because symbols are more useful dead than alive in the machinery of change, and Sanderson is too honest to pretend otherwise. Vin is the instrument. She is the Mistborn that the revolution needed, the weapon that preservation shaped across a generation, the person who could stand at the fulcrum of a cosmological crisis and not break. She defeats what can be defeated. She absorbs what needs to be absorbed. She does what weapons do. She ends things. But endings are not enough. The world doesn't just need to be saved from ruin. It needs to be rebuilt. It needs to be given a shape that makes it worth saving in the first place. Blue sky, green leaves, flowers, the things that Kelsier spent his whole life dreaming about and never got to see. Someone has to know what those things are, has to remember them in enough detail to recreate them, has to have spent 1,000 years, across generations of keepers, preserving the memory of a world that no one alive has ever experienced. That is Sazed's job. It was always Sazed's job. He is not the hero of the trilogy in spite of being the scholar and the archivist and the man who thinks rather than fights. He is the hero of the trilogy because of those things. Because the crisis was never just military or political or even cosmological. The crisis was about whether anything worth preserving would survive to be preserved. Kelsier asked if a better world was possible. Vin made it possible. Sazed remembered what it looked like and built it from scratch using the knowledge he had carried on his arms for the entire story. I want to leave you with a thread that points toward the later Mistborn books without opening any doors I shouldn't open here. Sazed becomes something at the end of Hero of Ages. Something that the Cosmere has a specific name for. Something that carries its own problems, its own limitations, its own strange grief. And the books that follow spend a great deal of time with the consequences of a person who was shaped by loss and faith and scholarship suddenly having the power of a god and the temperament of a keeper. The question those books are asking is something like, what happens when the person who is best suited to preserve the world is now responsible for changing it? And is a god who finds decisive action almost impossible more preservation or more Sazed? I'm not going to answer that here. But I want you to feel the question, because I think it reframes everything about how you read Sazed in the original trilogy. He wasn't just the right person for the job at the end of Hero of Ages. He was shaped, across 3 books, into someone who would approach godhood the way he approached everything else, carefully, with full awareness of what could be lost, carrying the weight of everything that had already been destroyed. That is the most important character in Mistborn, not the most powerful one. Not the most dramatic one, the most important one. The one the whole story was building toward, in every quiet scene on the road where he opened a coppermind and talked about what people used to believe. Every time I reread the trilogy, Sazed is the character I watch most closely now. Not because his scenes are the most exciting, because his scenes are the most honest. He is a person doing the unglamorous work of holding things together, of refusing to let knowledge die, of staying present in a world that keeps trying to make him feel like he doesn't matter. And then, at the end, the world discovers that he was the only one who could save it. If you have thoughts on Sazed, if you rate him differently than I do, or if there's a moment in the trilogy I didn't mention that you think is the key to understanding him, leave it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're new here, and this is your first time watching, welcome. This is what we do here. We go slow, we go deep, and we pay attention to the people on the road with their coppermind bracelets. This is the Cosmere Archive.